The cabin door burst open, wind howling like a dying wolf through the cracks. Elijah stood frozen in the doorway, his rifle slipping slightly in his grip. Blood dotted the wooden floor. A child's rag doll lay discarded near the hearth, its button, eyes staring at nothing. In the corner, Naomi clutched her swollen belly, trembling, her other arm shielding her daughter. Smoke rose from the chimney, but the fire had long gone out. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "They found us." Outside, the sound of hooves grew louder, angry, relentless. Elijah stepped forward, his jaw tight, eyes locked on the woman he had once taken in with nothing but a prayer and a broken past. "You told me this was over," he said, voice low. Naomi met his gaze with silent sorrow. "It never ends when you've stolen from men like them." Suddenly, glass shattered, a bullet tore through the window. Elijah dove forward, shielding both mother and child as gunfire screamed through the night. This was the price of secrets, he realized. The cost of compassion. "Before we jump back in, introduce yourself and where you're tuning in from, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our Wild West love stories where danger, destiny, and devotion ride side by side. Ready to find out how a grieving rancher's kindness turned into a deadly standoff? Let's ride back to where it all began. The town of Dry Creek had a way of burying its ghosts under dust and silence. Wind carried stories like ashes, scattering them from saloon to chapel, across sun-scorched porches and rusted fence rails. Folks didn't talk much in Dry Creek, but they watched. Always watched. Naomi Talisa Greyfeather stepped off the freight wagon just after dawn. The driver, a sunburned man with a whiskey bottle tucked between his knees, didn't even wait for her to say thank you. He snapped the reins, turning the horses before her boots had fully touched the ground. She didn't blame him. She stood at the edge of the boardwalk, her dress clinging to her belly in the morning heat, a faded shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Beside her, a girl no older than 6 gripped her hand tightly, eyes alert, lips tight. They looked out of place here, the Navajo woman and her daughter. Alone. Her cheek bore a pale scar that ran from the corner of her eye to her jaw. Her limp was subtle, but present. She wore her pain like old jewelry, visible but never discussed. No one greeted her. No one offered help. The saloon doors swung once, and a few heads turned. One man whispered something behind a tilted hat. Another leaned against a wooden post, chewing tobacco, eyes narrowed in open suspicion. "They say she was with Outlaws," a woman murmured to her friend in front of the general store. "No," said the friend. "They say she's cursed. Her last husband died not 3 months after she wed. And the baby, she's with child again. Can you believe that?" Naomi didn't respond. She never did. She simply nodded toward her daughter, who climbed the boarding house steps ahead of her with the quiet obedience only grief could teach. The room was small. One bed, a cracked mirror, a basin that barely held water. But it was enough. Enough to rest, enough to hide. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed that night, hands on her belly, and whispered in Diné to the child growing inside her. Words of safety, of peace, of forgiveness. Not that she believed in any of those things anymore. But her mother once said that what you say to your unborn shapes who they become. She had no friends in Dry Creek, not one, and it had been that way in every town since she fled Red Mesa 2 years ago. The whispers followed her like shadows. Some townsfolk feared her for her silence, others hated her for her blood. She was Navajo in a land that had already decided her worth. She was a widow twice over, once by war and once by betrayal. She walked with a limp from a horsefall years ago, and now she carried another man's child, unmarried, unspoken for, and unapologetic. Her daughter Luma had stopped speaking after the last fire. The child hadn't screamed when their wagon was attacked on the desert road, hadn't cried when they buried Naomi's second husband in a shallow grave beneath a mesquite tree. She just stared. Always stared. And so they were a pair, mother and daughter, bound together by loss and silence. Naomi tried not to let the town sink into her bones. She did laundry for the boarding house, cleaned rooms, kept her head down. Sometimes she'd sing in dîner while hanging sheets to dry, and the other women would pause, confused by the beauty of it, then quickly scold themselves for admiring anything about her. The preacher's wife once offered her a scrap of bread. Naomi thanked her softly, and the next day someone painted witch in white chalk on the boarding house steps. She learned to leave before dawn and return after dusk. She avoided the saloon, the church, the school. She taught Luma numbers and letters, herself in the dim corner of their rented room. The girl didn't speak, but she listened. She listened better than most adults ever did. It was in that same hush of routine, weeks after arriving in Dry Creek, that Naomi first saw Elijah Cutter. He came into town once a week. He didn't smile, didn't tip his hat. A tall man with sun-leathered skin and a rancher's slouch, he moved like someone too tired to pretend anymore. Folks didn't whisper about Elijah, they stayed silent. Out of respect or fear, Naomi never knew which. He came for supplies, left just as quick. She might not have noticed him, if not for Luma. One morning, while Naomi was collecting water from the pump, Luma wandered toward the general store, drawn by something unseen. Naomi called out, panic rising in her chest. The girl didn't hear. She rarely did. Naomi's feet thundered across the boardwalk. Her shawl slipped, her breath caught, and she reached her daughter just as a horse reared from a sudden noise. But Elijah Cutter was there first. He moved with the speed of someone who had lived through gunfights, grabbing the horse's reins and steadying the creature before it could trample anyone. Then he turned to Luma, knelt to her level, and said something Naomi couldn't hear. Luma didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply reached out and touched his beard, curious. Then she smiled. The first smile Naomi had seen in nearly a year. Elijah looked up. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Not trust. Not yet. But something real. He stood and walked off without another glance, sack of oats in one hand, rifle on his back. Later, the boarding house keeper said, "You best stay away from that one, Miss Greyfeather. Elijah Cutter's colder than winter and twice as mean." Naomi said nothing. But that night, when Luma drew a picture in the dust with her finger, it was a man with a wide hat and a kind face. The wind shifted the day Elijah Cutter rode past the boarding house and actually stopped. It was late afternoon. Naomi stood at the well, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, sweat clinging to her brow. She'd just finished scrubbing linens on a washboard, the roughness biting her fingers raw. Luma sat on the stoop nearby, drawing patterns in the dust again, circles, stars, horseshoes. She always drew horses now. Elijah dismounted slowly, boots crunching dry gravel. He didn't say a word, just tied his horse loosely to the post and approached with a cautious air, like a man more familiar with coyotes than people. Naomi paused, basin still in her hands. She didn't speak either. Words had always betrayed her. Promises, vows, even prayers. Elijah finally nodded toward the girl. "She's quiet." Naomi let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "She is." He crouched, one knee popping audibly, and picked up a small stone from Luma's drawing. "But sees everything." "She always has," Naomi said softly. "She doesn't need words." Elijah looked up. Most people talk too much anyway. And that was it. Their first real conversation. A handful of words that hung in the air longer than any sermon or street gossip ever could. He stood and nodded again, not at Naomi, but at Luma, like they shared a secret understanding. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off toward his ranch. Naomi stood there long after he was gone, the water in her basin long cooled. He came back the next week. This time he brought 2 apples and handed one to Luma without speaking. She took it with both hands, held it up to Naomi like a prize. Elijah didn't stay long, just tipped his hat, glanced at Naomi's growing belly and said, "Storm's coming. You feel it?" She nodded. "I always do." The visits weren't regular, but they weren't random either. Sometimes he passed by and didn't stop. Other times he brought something, extra cloth for diapers, a small tin of honey, a wooden toy carved like a rabbit. He never asked for thanks, and Naomi, though wary, never turned him away. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't talk about the scar on her face or the child in her belly. He didn't ask about the limp or why she never went to church. She didn't ask why he always carried a rifle on his back or why his eyes seemed to carry 10 years more than his age. But they noticed things. He noticed how her hands trembled when thunder rolled in from the mountains. She noticed how he stood, a little closer to her and Luma, when strangers passed too slow on horseback. Dry Creek noticed too. "You be careful," the shopkeeper warned Elijah one morning. "That woman brings bad luck." "She's brought me peace," Elijah replied, without blinking. That afternoon someone slashed the saddle straps on his horse. He said nothing, just repaired the leather and kept coming back. One evening, a full moon rose over Dry Creek, casting silver light over the dusty rooftops. Naomi sat on the boarding house porch, brushing Luma's hair. The girl had fallen asleep leaning against her, arms wrapped around the wooden rabbit Elijah had brought the week before. Elijah arrived quietly, his horse barely making a sound. He dismounted and didn't speak until Naomi looked up. "You ever seen the desert bloom?" he asked. She shook her head. "After a rain," he said, "there's wildflowers everywhere, even out here." "Doesn't rain often," she replied. "No," he said, "but it will." He walked closer, sat on the steps beside her, careful not to wake the child. The silence between them felt less like emptiness and more like shelter. Like sitting by a fire that didn't need stoking. "I've got a spare room at the ranch," he said after a long while. "Not much, just walls and warmth. No one would bother you out there." Naomi's heart skipped. Her fingers froze in Luma's hair. "I don't want charity. Ain't charity. It's choice." She turned to face him fully, moonlight catching her scar. "Why?" He didn't flinch. "Because you and her deserve better than this town." Naomi studied him. There was no motive in his eyes, no pity, just weariness, and maybe, quietly, hope. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded, stood, and walked into the night. By the week's end, Naomi and Luma moved into the ranch. It wasn't easy. The townspeople talked louder now, as if distance gave them bravery. "Living with a savage," someone spat outside the saloon. "He's lost his damn mind." But Elijah didn't care. He never had. Naomi cleaned, cooked when she could, rested when she had to. She spent mornings with the horses, evenings teaching Luma how to press wildflowers between pages of old books. She sang again, softly, under her breath. And Elijah, he just kept showing up, quietly fixing fence posts, checking on the chickens, leaving food by her door when her back ached too much to stand. Some nights they ate together on the porch. Other nights they didn't speak at all, but something was growing. Something not spoken of. Trust. Then came the rider. He appeared on the ridge one morning, still as stone, watching the ranch from a distance. Naomi saw him first, her spine going rigid, hand gripping the edge of the wash basin. Elijah saw her reaction, followed her gaze and narrowed his eyes. "Friend of yours?" he asked. "No," she said, breath catching. "Far from it." That night Elijah cleaned his rifle with steady hands. Naomi barely ate. Luma didn't speak, but she slept beside Naomi that night, clutching her carved rabbit like a shield. The next day, the rider was gone. But Naomi knew it wasn't over. She told Elijah the truth that night, about Red Mesa, about the outlaws who took everything, her home, her husband, her safety, about the debt she escaped with, the gold she'd stolen from her second husband's gang after they murdered him and left her for dead, about how she ran with only her daughter and a baby inside her, and a secret too valuable to stay hidden forever. She expected anger. What she got was silence. Then Elijah said, "So they're hunting you." She nodded. He leaned forward, voice low. "Let them come." Naomi stared at him. "You'd risk your life for mine?" He didn't answer, just reached out, gently placed a hand over hers and said, "I already am." The wind outside howled that night, carrying whispers across the plains, whispers of danger, of love unspoken, of choices made in silence. But inside that small ranch house, a scarred woman and a guarded man sat together in the glow of lamplight, and for the first time in years, Naomi believed she might be safe. It happened on a market day. Naomi had gone into town alone for the first time since moving to the ranch. Elijah had offered to go with her, but she insisted. "If I'm going to live here," she said, "I need to face them sometime." She carried, her shawl tight around her shoulders, her belly swollen now and slowing her steps. Luma had stayed behind with Elijah, too young to navigate the stairs and snickers of Dry Creek. The general store was quiet when she entered. She picked up flour, salt, and a small tin of ginger candies for Luma's collection. Mrs. Albright, the storekeeper's wife, gave her a thin smile but said nothing. As Naomi paid, she caught a reflection in the glass window, a man leaning by the watering trough outside, his face mostly hidden by a broad-brimmed hat. She paused. Her breath hitched. He looked familiar. Too familiar. Her coins dropped to the floor. The man outside turned just slightly, enough for her to see the long scar across his cheek. Clayton Wolfe. One of them. She backed out of the store, goods forgotten, hands shaking. Her stomach twisted, not from the baby, but from the memory. Blood. Flames. Her second husband gasping in the dirt, and Wolfe smiling through it all. She turned and walked fast. Too fast. Her limp catching, breath shortening. She passed the saloon, where a group of men leaned against the railing. Thought she'd be long dead by now. One of them muttered, "That half-breed thief's got more lives than a cat." Naomi kept walking, but one man stepped in front of her. Town Deputy Boone Collier. A thick-necked brute with a badge he didn't deserve, and a history of drunk mistakes. "Well, well," he said, squinting. "Elijah's little prize. Tell me, what's he pay you in, beads or bullets?" She moved to pass him. He shoved her shoulder, lightly but enough. "Where you headed, witch? Back to your cave?" She stumbled, caught herself, bit her tongue. Behind. Laughter rose. That's when she saw Wolfe again, across the street now, watching it all with a quiet smile. She turned and ran, not a full sprint. She couldn't, but enough. Down the boardwalk, past the old chapel, through the alley behind the blacksmith's. Her shawl snagged on a nail and tore. Her boot slipped on a patch of gravel. She fell hard, scraping her hands, and she kept running, out of town, away from the pain, away from the shame. It started snowing that evening, high desert snow, thin, cold, and quiet, like ash from an old fire. By nightfall, Elijah returned to the ranch to find only Luma. The girl pointed toward the hills, toward the direction of town. Her eyes were wide, her lips pressed into a pale line. "She ran," Elijah said softly, almost to himself. He saddled his horse, packed blankets, took no rifle, only a lantern. Naomi collapsed near the old wash trail that led into the bluffs. Her feet blistered, her lungs burned. The cold cut through her dress like knives. She curled beneath a fallen tree, wrapping her arms around her belly. "I shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "I should have kept running." Snow landed on her cheeks. Her teeth chattered. Her body ached. "I'm sorry," she said to the child inside her. "I've failed you. I've failed her." She closed her eyes. Then, the crunch of hooves. At first, she thought it was a dream, a memory. But then she felt warmth. The soft weight of a wool blanket draped over her shoulders, the sound of someone kneeling beside her. Not fast, not loud, just present. "Elijah," she breathed. "I'm here." She started to cry. He didn't pull her into his arms. He didn't kiss her or speak promises. He just crouched beside her in the snow, his hand hovering near hers like a fire that didn't want to burn. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she whispered. "I've seen you fight through worse. I was so strong, and now Her voice broke. He gently wiped snow from her hair. You're still strong. I ran, she said. I left Luma. No, he said. You broke. There's a difference. She finally looked at him. His eyes weren't full of pity. They were full of knowing. He had been broken once too, and he had rebuilt himself brick by brick, silence by silence. I saw one of them, she said. Clayton Wolfe. His jaw tightened, but he didn't ask questions. He didn't demand names or make threats. He just stood and held out a hand. I'll walk with you, he said, if you'll let me. She took it. They made it back to the ranch before dawn. Luma ran into Naomi's arms as soon as the door opened. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just held her mother tight. Small, hands trembling, Elijah poured warm water for a bath. He made tea. He sat at the table, keeping vigil as mother and daughter curled together under quilts by the fire. Later, as the sun climbed the sky, Naomi asked him, "Why didn't you come sooner?" He didn't look up from the chair where he sat whittling wood. I knew you'd run eventually. I just hoped I'd be close enough when you did. She blinked at him. You don't need saving, Naomi, he said. You need someone who doesn't let go. The snow melted by midday. But something stayed. A shift. Naomi didn't sing that day. She didn't smile. But that night, as they sat quietly beside the fire, she reached out and placed her hand over Elijah's. Not as thanks, but as trust. Spring came early to Dry Creek that year. The snow melted fast, revealing a land still wounded from winter but ready to heal. So were they. Naomi didn't return to town right away, not because of fear, but because she didn't need to anymore. Everything she needed was at the ranch: Luma, the growing life inside her, and the man who didn't ask her to be anyone other than herself. Elijah built a chicken coop first, then a second corral for the mustangs that sometimes wandered down from the hills. Naomi, despite the weight of her belly, helped where she could, tending to the garden, feeding the hens, teaching Luma to brush the horses without flinching. Together they began to build something that felt like peace. It wasn't loud or grand or filled with declarations. It was quiet, steady, earned. Some nights Naomi would sit on the porch wrapped in a shawl, watching Elijah repair the fence by lantern light. Luma would lie asleep beside her, rabbit in hand, as the stars turned above them. I never thought I'd have this, Naomi whispered once. Elijah didn't turn. It was always, yours, Henry nodded once. And that was it. That night, they ate together by lantern light. Henry spoke little, only enough to answer questions. Amos gave him the cot in the main room and placed his own rifle above the door, just in case. Claire watched the boy as he slept. Thin, bruised, eyes twitching even in dreams. She knew that kind of fear, and she knew then this home wasn't just theirs anymore, but peace doesn't last in Dalton Hollow. 2 days later, the sheriff came knocking. Got a letter from Kansas, he said gruffly. State says there's another claimant, one of Amos's old war brothers, says he wants the boy, and he's coming to take him. Amos stiffened. Who? Name's Eli Maddox. Says you owe him. Amos went pale. Claire stepped forward. What kind of man is he? The sheriff sighed. The kind who makes promises with blood, the kind who never forgets a debt. That night, Amos finally told her everything, about the war, about the fires they lit behind enemy lines, about the boy they left behind, about how Eli took the fall for a crime Amos committed and spent 5 years in a cell for it. Claire listened, cold and quiet. And now he wants your nephew, she said. He doesn't want the boy, Amos replied. He wants me to owe him again. They stood in silence. Then Claire lit another lantern, grabbed Henry's bag, and tossed it onto the table. What are you doing? Amos asked. Packing. For what? For war, she said, voice steady. This time, no one takes what's ours. The sun rose soft and gold over Dalton Hollow, casting long shadows across a town still shaken from the storm. The tornado had taken 3 barns, a roof from the chapel, and half the saloon sign. But it had spared the little cabin on the edge of the fields. Amos stood in front of the town hall, Henry clinging to his side. Claire stood beside them, her hand steady on the boy's shoulder. Eli Maddox had arrived an hour before, dusty and grinning, backed by a polished lawyer and a badge from Kansas. He looked at Henry like a man eyeing a poker hand he was sure he could win. Sheriff Collier tried to keep the peace. This is a civil claim now. If it goes to court, it'll be months before the boy knows where he belongs. Eli stepped forward, tipping his hat. Or the other party can concede. Be the decent man I always knew you were, Amos. Amos didn't move. His jaw was clenched tight. Claire could see it. The war in him, the guilt, the temptation to fold just to keep the boy safe. So she did what no one expected. She stepped forward first. Claire faced Eli with her scar exposed and her back straight. You've got papers, but we've got a home, a bed, warm food, a child who hasn't flinched in 3 nights. Eli chuckled. You think being a broken woman makes you a mother? No, she said, but surviving this town did, and if you're the kind of man who takes a child from someone just to make a point, I pray the judge sees you for what you are. The crowd murmured. Mrs. Whitmore turned her head. Even Reverend Merton said nothing. Eli's smile slipped. Just slightly. Then Amos stepped up beside her, his voice calm but thunderous. You want something from me? Take it. He turned to the crowd, to the banker, the preacher, the women who once crossed the street to avoid Claire. I did what most of you never had the guts to do. I married a woman you tried to burn down. And I'll say it plain. If choosing her means you shut your doors to me, so be it. I'd rather live in a house made of ash with her than in any of yours. The silence that followed was thick enough to crush a man. Then Henry slipped his hand into Claire's, and someone in the crowd, maybe the blacksmith, maybe the sheriff, started clapping. Slow, but honest. Then another joined, and another, until the hollow, for the first time in a long, long while, sounded like hope. Eli left that afternoon, eyes dark, teeth clenched, his badge tucked deep into his coat pocket. No one stopped him. That night, they didn't celebrate with noise or whiskey. There was no feast, no dancing, just 3 figures seated on the front porch of a rebuilt cabin, watching the prairie wind chase the stars. Henry dozed in Claire's lap. She held his hand and stared at the horizon. You ever think we'd get this far? She asked. Amos shook his head. Didn't think I'd get past winter. She smiled faintly. Neither did I. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Claire said, Let's name the ranch. Amos looked over, surprised. You got something in mind? She nodded. Mercy Hill. He repeated it once, slowly. Mercy Hill. Then he kissed her hand, just once, and whispered, It fits. 3 months later, they took a trip to the old cemetery west of town. Claire placed wild sage and lavender on 2 graves, one for her sister, long gone, and one for Amos's brother, buried with no marker. Henry held both their hands as they stood between the headstones. I didn't know him, the boy said softly. Amos crouched beside him. You carry his name now. That's enough. Claire pressed her palm to Henry's chest. And one day, you'll show the world what it means. Closing scene. It snowed lightly that evening. The first frost of the season dusted the roof of Mercy Hill as the 3 of them stood at the fence, watching the horses huddled together near the barn. Claire reached for Amos's hand. He took it without hesitation. Henry leaned into her side, and for the first time in her life, Claire Mercer felt no need to run, explain, or hide. She was home. She was known. She was loved. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.